All right, here we are, ladies and gentlemen, the Wednesday edition of Talkback. Hi, Bob.
Good morning.
We have a screen between us. Anyway, Bob Seidenschwartz over there with us this morning from the Montana World Affairs Council, and glad to have you guys with us this morning. This is a highly anticipated visit. We're so glad you're here. Seriously, this is great.
Thanks for having us.
You bet. We have Molly Short-Carr with us this morning and Mary Poole from Soft Landing, Missoula. Now, Bob, you want me to go ahead and read some of the bios here?
Yeah, if you would, please.
You bet. All right, here we go. Mary Poole is a fourth-generation Montanan, lives with her husband, a toddler, and two dogs in Missoula. Last September, upon seeing the photos of Alan Kurdi, the 3-year-old that had drowned fleeing the war in Syria, she was moved to try to do more to help refugees fleeing war and terror worldwide. With friends and acquaintances, she formed the group Soft Landing Missoula, and together they've spent the last year volunteering their time and energy to research refugee resettlement, assist a resettlement agency to return to Missoula, and ultimately support Missoula and the refugees that land here. Soft Landing Missoula's effort has grown from this initial group of about 10 people to over 1,000 participants. Soft Landing Missoula's vision is to help Missoula be a welcoming, supportive, and informed community that can assist refugees to integrate and thrive. This vision is being achieved through education and outreach, various community engagement programs, and direct services for the refugees. SLM is dedicated to building bridges, not furthering divisions, and welcomes discussion, questions, and conversation as a way to create an inclusive community for all. Molly Short-Carr, Executive Director of the newly established International Rescue Committee Office in Missoula, a native of Buffalo, New York. Molly got a BA in Political Science and International Relations from Canisius College in 2002, and a Master's in Organizational Leadership from Medaille College in Buffalo in 2011. Molly has worked with refugees for almost 15 years and was previously the executive director of Journey's End, a mid-sized nonprofit serving refugees in Western New York. Okay, so with that as introduction, we're out of time. Thanks so much for joining us. Okay, Bob, take it away.
Just a brief comment. You know, we've been doing this show, The Council on the Radio, for several years, and it really occurs to me that many of the discussions and subjects really have been kind of leading up in terms of background and education to this moment in discussion. Because when you get to the point where you're a refugee, nobody's asking to do this. They don't raise their hand and say, what do you want to do for your career? I want to be a refugee. This is preceded by a number of events, a number of both historical as well as current decisions that are made that bring people to this point. So as we're having this discussion today, kind of let's keep this in mind that there's numerous issues that always precede this moment. So having said that, I want to say welcome and thank you for coming here today. So please, I'd like to have you each give a little background on, in your case, Molly, the organization, what it does, its origins, so that people have a real kind of basic foundation of what your purpose and mission is.
Well, the International Rescue Committee actually has a very proud and long history of working with refugees and providing humanitarian support globally. It is a global organization. However, in the United States, it really focuses on refugee resettlement. And that started nearly 80 years ago at the request of Albert Einstein, who himself was a refugee who fled Nazi Germany and was looking for ways to support other academics and professionals also fearing persecution in Nazi Germany. Today, the organization provides resettlement support and other assistance to refugees, immigrants, asylum seekers, victims of human trafficking, and other categories of immigrants throughout the United States, primarily focusing on the work of refugee resettlement through our agreements with different partners and contractors.
No, okay, so go ahead, Mary.
So Soft Landing Missoula is really a community grassroots group that formed last September. Like we said, when the photos of Alan Kurdi came out, I was sitting around in my living room in a very safe home in a very safe city with friends, and we were all playing with our children, and seeing that type of photo come when we have so much here in Missoula, to witness that type of photo was really heartbreaking for us. And in a way that I think we grow up in a world where there's plenty of photos of war and videos of war happening, but to be a mother holding a small child and see that kind of photo was just absolutely heartbreaking. So we got together and we started researching, figuring out, coming up with what could we possibly do to help refugees? And we couldn't find a lot of outlets here in Missoula and Montana to help refugees. I think we all donated to the UNHCR, but when you donate money, you don't really know where that goes. And so we thought there has to be something more concrete we can do. What if we could bring some families here to Missoula?
Just for clarification, so everyone kind of knows, we've talked about immigration and refugees and immigrants. Maybe it would be good if we had a little bit of a definition of what makes someone a refugee as opposed to an immigrant.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is something that when we started this group, we didn't know. And so that was part of this process, this year-long process of figuring out what is a refugee, what is refugee resettlement. And what we really found out that there's 65 million displaced people in the world. I know when Molly Short-Carr started her work 15 years ago, that number was 12 million.
Did you displace all those people?
Not personally, no.
Making sure.
But it is exponentially growing. About 20 million of those 65 million are registered refugees. So the 65 million includes asylum seekers. It includes internally displaced people that have lost their homes but are still within the borders of their country. And it also includes refugees. And about 20 million are registered refugees. You have to cross an international border and register with a organization like the United Nations to start the process of even being considered for third country resettlement. And just very briefly, I'll talk about the durable solutions that the UN has. Or
just real quick to backtrack. When you say third world settlement, or what was the third country settlement?
Yeah.
These are the type of refugees that would be coming to the United States, right?
Or other countries that participate in third country resettlement, yeah.
But all of these are the ones that, I'm sorry, you said they were not designated refugees.
Registered.
But registered refugees.
Mm-hmm.
So to be in the United States, to come to Missoula, for example, you'd have to first be a registered refugee to get approval to go to a third country resettlement?
Yeah, it's actually a very complicated, long process for refugees to come to the United States for resettlement. In fact, it's probably the most difficult way to enter the United States as a non-U.S. citizen or permanent resident. Refugees have to flee and cross an international border before they can even begin registering. They must register with their host country, the secondary country, and each country has their own rules and regulations on how refugees are processed. Then they must also register with the United Nations High Commission for Refugees before they can even get to the point where they may apply for U.S. Refugee Admissions Program resettlement. Then refugees go through a series of interviews, and they go through a series of screening processes to determine, one, they're eligible by our definition of who a refugee is, that their situation is genuine, that they are not a risk to the United States, and that they also have no health concerns that would be a risk to citizens of the United States. And
hang on to that, right? We're up against a break. I'm sorry.
Okay.
So about every 10 minutes, we take a commercial break. So plus we have Tyler on the line, and we have 3 lines open. The folks from Soft Landing, Mary Poole, Molly Short-Carr here in studio with us. 721-1290 is our number, and we'll be right back. Okay, we are back on Talkback. 721-1290 is our number, 1-800-568-5309. Joining us in studio, the folks from Soft Landing, Missoula, Mary Poole, Molly Short-Carr. And I interrupted you, Molly, while you were doing a very important explanation about refugee resettlement. So please continue.
So going back to the process, the average review and screening process for any refugee to come to the United States is an average between 24 to 36 months. Certain countries have additional screening processes that are in place. But on average, 24, 36 months, and then they begin the process of being assured to an agency in the United States that can provide support to them, undergoing cultural orientation training, and then getting ready for their trip to the U.S.
Okay, go ahead.
I'd like to add a really important number, I think. So the 65 million people that we talked about earlier that were displaced by war and conflict, and about a third of them, 20 million, being registered to even start the process to be considered for third country resettlement. 99% of that 20 million people don't qualify for third country resettlement. It's only 1% of registered refugees that even begin to qualify to be considered for third country resettlement.
So why is, please give us some insight to why the 99% is not qualified versus the 1% that is.
Yeah, I'd love to. First of all, it's not the best or easiest solution for many of those people.
They want to go home.
They want to go home. The UN wants to guide them in getting home. So that's always the very first solution is voluntary repatriation, which is just a fancy word of saying assisting people to return home. And then the second solution that is looked at before resettlement is local integration. So can they become citizens and legally able to work and live in the countries that's hosting them as a refugee? So those two solutions are always looked at before third country resettlement. Third country resettlement really is for a very specialized group of people that would face further fear of persecution or death if they were to return home. A perfect example of that is in some countries in Africa, it's illegal to be in the LGBT community. So even if my neighbors and friends and family can return home after a war dies down, if I'm in the LGBT community, I would still face further fear of persecution or death if I returned. So I would begin to qualify to be considered for third country resettlement. Children with chronic medical conditions that can't be served in war-torn areas where the infrastructure's been destroyed, victims of torture, political refugees. It really is an opportunity for the United States to help some of the most affected and persecuted populations in the world.
Okay, let's get to the phone. Grab your headphones there, ladies. And Tyler, first of all, thanks for holding. You're on Talkback with Mary Poole and Molly Short-Carr. Hi.
Hi, thanks, everybody. Can your guest please describe the photo that they were speaking about earlier in the show that led them to this epiphany that they needed to go and help everybody?
The little boy who had passed away, right?
Tyler, are you trying to make me cry this early in the morning?
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so there were a few photos that came, but basically it was a 3-year-old Syrian boy that had drowned in the crossing of the Mediterranean with his family.
He was on his way to Italy, right?
He was on his way
to Greece.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And as of note, his mother and other sibling also died that day. His father was the only survivor. And it's a photo of an officer cradling this dead child in what seems...
I remember the photo.
Yeah.
I do. And you know what? I actually remember the story of the family that brought that child over. And you know what? What's sad is that there are people out here like me that actually remember the truth and remember the fact that that entire family was wiped off the face of the earth because the father decided to take the entire family over to go into a dental appointment, and their entire ship capsized, and the only survivor was the father. And they weren't even refugees. So you guys are using a joke photograph of a kid that died because his father decided to take an entire family across the border and go to a dental appointment, and you guys are using that to try and sway the hearts of Missoulians and Montanans to try and take in Syrian refugees, and that family wasn't even a refugee family.
Okay, Tyler, we're going to let her answer that, okay?
Yeah, Tyler,
Yeah.
I think you bring up a really good point. I think that photo was very representative of the enormous tragedy and atrocity that's happening in the Middle East right now, with the threat of ISIS, with the threat of governments exploiting their citizens. And we do see this movement of migrants going from Northern Africa and the Middle East to Europe. It is of note that population that is traveling to Europe does not have an actual legal path as a refugee to come to the United States. So that's not a population. Although that was the catalyst for soft landing Missoula, it's actually not a population that we would ever serve here in Missoula because they're going to seek asylum in the European Union.
Yeah, and I would say to Tyler that I don't think our two guests are using that photo for purposes of manipulating the citizens here in Missoula, because the refugee crisis stands by itself. And the story that it tells stands by itself. So even if this photo, and I'll grant Tyler the accuracy of his statement, it doesn't change the reality that's taking place in North Africa, the Middle East, and in other countries around the world.
Yeah, there are millions of people who are fleeing and attempting to go somewhere, almost anywhere, right?
Exactly. You know, the Syrian refugee crisis is very present, and we see it on a regular basis in our news, our media, but they do not account for the 65 million displaced individuals across this globe, or the 20 million refugees registered who are in need of support or assistance.
Okay, we're up against a break, and we have Jerry and Patty, and two lines open. 721-1290 is our number. We're going to come right back. The folks from Soft Landing, Mary Poole, Molly Short-Car joining us. We'll be right back. And we are back on Talkback. 721-1290 is our number. 1-800-568-5309. Mary Poole, Molly Short-Car joining us from Soft Landing, Missoula. I want to get at least one more call in because we have a hard break here in about 3 minutes. So, Jerry, quickly, what's on your mind?
Good morning. Once they resettle in Missoula, say, where do they receive their money and stuff for the basic needs like food, housing, clothing? Where do they receive the money and stuff to survive on?
Thanks, Jerry, for that
Thanks,
question.
Jerry. Go ahead.
So, as a resettlement agency, we do receive an initial amount of financial support to provide to the refugees. Each refugee gets approximately $11.25 to provide housing, to get their household goods, their furniture, their initial food supplies, and we assist in the management of that fund on behalf of the refugee. So
The $11.25 is 1,125, not 1,100.
thanks, Mary.
Okay. All right.
So, you know, and if you're a single or a family of two, that's not a lot of funds to get started. A larger family, it gives a little more financial resource and support to them. From there, we work and connect them to public assistance, and they do receive either refugee cash assistance through the federal government, TANF, or Targeted Assistance for Needy Families, which again is federal dollars. SNAP, which is Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Programming.
Yeah, the food EBT cards, right?
Yeah,
Right.
it traditionally had been called food stamps.
Okay.
And these are federally funded programs that are bringing federal dollars to Missoula so that we can provide support to the refugees and then get circulated into the Missoula community.
Now, what about jobs? I mean, if they're looking for employment.
Well, that's a really good point. So on average at this point, we have a very small base of refugees, but the average for each family has been about 1.5 months before the first adult is employed. And then, as you know, as they become employed, they start paying taxes. And as refugees come here, they're going to increase our tax base here in Missoula, paying into the tax system. And it's a really important note that once the refugee starts working and they're no longer receiving public assistance, they're then paying into the overall system. And a recent study showed that on average, depending on family size and the support and where they're located, a refugee pays back all of the assistance that have been provided them through taxes within 13 to 22 years. And then after that, they continue to pay into our tax base. So it's what we call a cost-positive program.
Okay, and with that, we need to take another break, top of the hour. So we have Patty and Gloria and John, and one line open. We're going to ask you guys to hold in the queue. We have a 6-minute break here for commercials, top of the hour news, and then we'll be back with Mary Poole and Molly Short-Car from Soft Landing, Missoula. We will continue here on Talkback, 721-1290, 1-800-568-5309. Or you can join us on our website at newstalkkgvo.com or use our very cool new KGVO app. All right, it is coming up on 9 o'clock. Here we are back. Hour number 2, Talkback underway, visiting with the folks from Soft Landing, Missoula, Mary Poole, Molly Short-Car. Now, before we get to Gloria and John, quick question for you, from Molly, and that is, I wanted to know, from your organization's perspective and the hundreds and hundreds of families that you work with, how many of these folks eventually become American citizens, and what's the process of that happening?
So refugees are eligible to become citizens of the United States. And indeed, it's one of the key features of integration is the ability to become civically engaged in a new community. And it's also one of the very distinct elements of the U.S. refugee admissions programs, kind of leading the forefront in giving refugees the opportunity to get acquainted and integrated into their new community and become civically engaged. In order to become citizens, refugees need to be here for a minimum of 5 years. They must be able to pass an English language test, both written and spoken, and they must also be able to pass a civics test.
Aha!
Yes.
Not like the rest of us
Yes.
who grow up here. I have no
And
idea
it's a
what's going on.
hard test. It's a hard test.
Yeah.
Nationally, about 40% of all immigrants become citizens, but nationally, about 55% of all refugees become citizens.
So a higher percentage.
Yes.
Okay, let's get to the phones then. All right, Gloria's been waiting the longest. Gloria, thank you for holding. You're on with Mary and Molly. Go ahead.
You're welcome. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I know Mary Poole. Her and I had a conference together, along with another friend of mine who's part of our group. And so I just wanted to comment that I do agree with the gentleman who called in about the photo. I recall that photo and that the family was quite well-to-do and had money. So that shouldn't have been used, much like the video that Hillary Clinton used on the Benghazi incident. But my curiosity is, I had asked Mary a question, and when we testified before the commissioners and city council asked the same question, never got an answer. Why weren't the residents of Missoula allowed to vote on this as to whether or not they wanted to take on a possible risk with national security and this economic burden? And another little gripe I have, but I would like my question asked, but then I'll hang up and let you, well, maybe I'll hang on to the phone in case you want to talk back to me, because sometimes things are said and I miss it. But the Hmongs and the Belarusians should not be compared to what is happening now. And one thing I discovered this morning is that you mentioned the UN was involved in this. The Hmongs actually aided us, these folks from Laos, in the Vietnam War. So with me, they should have had the red carpet treatment. The Belarusians, they were different. You know, those people were sponsored.
Hey,
So
Gloria.
if you could answer that question for me as to why the people had no voice in this.
Hey, Gloria, real quick, when you say what's happening now, are you talking about the Congolese refugees coming to Missoula, or are you talking about the issue in Syria?
I'm talking about the strife with the Syrians and all throughout the world, and the fact that we are more economically depressed than ever. You know, we should have a voice in our government. And as a taxpayer, and who was demonized, by the way, in order to achieve the success that they've had, because we were there just to alert people that this could be a national security problem, because even our FBI director and Homeland Security director said they couldn't vet people properly. So
there's a lot of questions
there's
in
a
there.
lot.
If we could
Okay,
let Mary and Molly answer that. Thank you.
Let's do the first one about the vote. What's the deal with that?
First of all, good morning, Gloria. It's nice to hear from you. So in terms of the process that happened when this all started, you know, it was very grassroots, and the letters that we ended up getting to support the abstract that was submitted by the IRC weren't really legal documents. They were just showing that there was community support for this program. And really, there's not necessarily a precedent for a vote in a community to bring a federal program. And so, you know, part of that was inexperience on my part, and, you know, just being very new at any sort of public service. But we did have a large base of support for this program. We gathered many, many letters from elected officials, community members, nonprofits, different facilities and businesses around Missoula. So there's not a legal precedent for a vote, first of all, but secondly, you know, it was partly due to my inexperience, not knowing that would be an issue.
Okay. Thanks, Gloria. I appreciate your call.
Real quick, because I think in Gloria's comment was something that a lot of people were misunderstanding or had difficulty understanding with the process with soft landing, is that when it started, a lot of the conversation was about bringing in refugees from Syria. Mm-hmm. And then we have brought in refugees from Congo, and I think a lot of people were surprised. It seemed like it was a different tack or a change in the course of what the discussion had been. I was wondering if you could walk through what happened there.
So when the International Rescue Committee started talking with Soft Landing and the community of Missoula about opening a refugee resettlement agency here, we recognize a desire to resettle refugees, but we as an organization resettle more than just Syrian refugees. And that was part of the discussion from the beginning. And at the time when we opened our office and started receiving refugees, it was the Congolese that were in what we call the caseload, or that were being processed for resettlement. We will have Syrian refugees here in Missoula. We will have refugees that are reflective of the overall U.S. refugee admissions program. It will not be just one population, because the U.S. refugee admissions program, going back to when the Hmong and the Belarusian came here, has a strong history of receiving refugees globally and not defining refugees by the geographical area that they come from.
Okay, we're up against a break. By the way, you guys are now officially rock stars. If you look over here, all four lines are blinking, which means you now have rock star status. So we're going to come right back with more of Talk Back with Mary Poole, Molly Short-Carr from Soft Landing, Missoula, right after this. Hey, we're back. This is Talk Back, 721-1290. Now, John, you said you had we have a news cut here regarding the FBI and James Comey.
Yeah, so this is James Comey from the FBI, the same James Comey now famous for investigating Hillary Clinton. He did other stuff in his life, including this. He was interviewed during the Syrian refugee crisis about whether or not we had a good system of understanding whether or not someone was linked to terrorism or not. This is a question that comes from from Democratic Senator out of Missouri. I think his last name is Thompson.
Bernie Thompson.
And this is, as the guests kind of point out, he goes on later to say that the refugee investigation process in Syria is better than it has ever been, but he still points out in this clip that there are problems with it, and it's something that raises alarms with many people. So if you want to go ahead and play.
Before this committee, Assistant Director Steinbeck said that the concerns in Syria is that we don't have the systems in place on the ground to collect the information to vet. That would be the concern. Databases don't hold the information on these individuals. Is that still the position of the department?
Yes, I think that's the challenge we're all talking about, is that we can only query against that which we have collected. And so if someone has never made a ripple in the pond in Syria in a way that would get their identity or their interests reflected in our database, we can query our database till the cows come home, but we're not going to, there'll be nothing show up because we have no record on that person. That's what Assistant Director Steinbach was talking about. You can only query what you've collected. And with respect to Iraqi refugees, we had far more in our databases because of our country's work there for a decade. This is a different situation.
Okay, Bob, go ahead.
You know, as I'm listening to this discussion, being able to bring refugees in entails a much higher degree of vetting than the issue of immigration, people coming across our borders that we don't have control over. That's a very different situation. So what I hear is refugees have a much more precise methodology applied to how they come in and are vetted versus my statement.
Yeah.
This is Mary.
This is Mary. On top of that, if you do continue to listen to the rest of the transcript or read the rest of the transcript, you do see that Comey expresses confidence in the system and that it is the most difficult way to get across the United States border. On top of that, though, if we're looking at the vetting process as a whole, we see that the databases are just one part of the vetting process. It also includes multiple in-person interviews by trained staff over this period of 18 to 24 months. It includes medical checks, biometric screenings. When you talk to refugees that have been through this process, it's a very, very difficult process to make it through. In fact, only about 50% end up, but from various reasons, actually getting selected to come to the U.S. On top of that,
I'm sorry. We've got to get some calls in. People have been waiting very patiently. So let's go to the phone. John, you've been waiting the longest. Thank you for your patience. Go ahead, sir.
Well, I'm sure it sounds like through the vetting, rather through the interview process. I don't know what kind of trained interviewers are interviewing the potential refugees, but that sort of kind of detracts from the whole compassionate cause. But I wanted to just go back to the photo thing, and that why not just apologize for the misrepresentation of the photo, and then you can move on with the truth, because I believe that...
Who do you want to apologize for that, though, John?
Well, I know you don't, because you moved right past it.
No. Let's just go back.
Because I think
I'm
you're
asking
a good
you
person.
legitimately, who do you want to apologize? I just...
To the public.
Well, who do you want to do that?
Pardon
Who's
me?
that person or entity that you're asking to apologize?
From whom would you like to hear the apology?
From any of the three people that put the photo out as a compassionate attention drawer toward this issue, and not move past it in saying, well, the media, and this is a real thing, so that's what backs up why we should be compassionate. Why not just say, well, it was something that stirred me, and yes, it's not the photo of a family as one of the poor that were fleeing. Rather, it was for a dental appointment. Why not just address the truth, and then you can move on?
Okay. Well, thanks for the call. So, anybody want to address that? Go ahead, Mary.
I guess I don't really see the express need for me to apologize for that is interesting. The picture motivated me. Whatever.
And that was before you found out the circumstances? Or?
Yeah, I mean, but the picture's representative of a much larger issue. The fact that a family may have had money and was a middle-class family only brings it closer to home. It only brings it right here to what could possibly happen. Nobody chooses this. Nobody chooses to flee for medical care, for their children's safety. You really think that if that person had a different option to go to the dentist,
well, I think what they're
he
getting
would get
at,
on a boat with his family.
I think what they're getting at is they feel like organizations like yours are using this photo as if you will, as a trump card, saying, "Oh my gosh, look at what's happening," and they just want, and you acknowledge that you knew where it came from, so maybe we can move on now.
I think too. I mean, for those people that are upset about the photo. There's a lot of details and background to the photo that Mary, I think, didn't even realize when she first saw the photo, right? I mean, we found out a lot of stuff later. But beyond that, it's undoubtedly true that refugee children are dying, that there's suffering in the world, that there's a lot of death and mutilation going on in Syria and all across the world. So it seems to me the point of why Mary decided to go into doing soft landing is beyond the subject of what actually is happening on the ground and refugee resettlement and the whole process.
So, and with that, we're up against a break. So we have Jeanette, Catherine, Susan, and Mary all waiting to visit. We're going to be right back. Take more calls in a moment. Hey, we're back on Talkback. 721-1290 is our number. All four lines humming. So let's get right back to the phone and say good morning to Jeanette. Hi, Jeanette. You're on with Mary and Molly. Hi.
Hi. I know Mary also. I met with her, with Gloria, who called earlier.
Okay.
I just have this concern. The federal guidelines for the resettlement of refugees include locating refugees in cities that have factories, plants, large places of employment. Missoula does not offer this. And I am very concerned about increased taxes for our schools and with mentors and so on, tutors, mainly because we don't have a rich place here. I think you look at the statistics of people who have to be really fed by, our Medicaid and our welfare situation. It seems a strange place at this time. Maybe when the timber industry was strong, it would have been a perfect place. But we don't have that industry anymore. And so I am very concerned about the fact that employment is not going to be as easy as it should be. And the federal guidelines, I think, include that.
Okay, we'll let them answer that question. Thank you for your call, Jeanette. So, ladies, you want to address that. The economy in Missoula couldn't support this.
So thank you, Jeanette, for the question. Just with the guidelines, we went through an intense process and reviewed the possibility of opening a resettlement agency in Missoula. We did our due diligence. We submitted our application to the federal government, who are responsible for upholding those guidelines. And the site was approved. And it was approved because there actually is a very tremendous community here in Missoula that not only has the capacity to support refugees through the standards of employment and housing and busing, but there is also a tremendous amount of community support that was brought up and acknowledged. There are hundreds of volunteers who have come forward to work with refugees to help them through the integration process. Each family gets a mentor team of 5 trained volunteers who help guide the refugees as they become part of the Missoula community. And there are jobs. Nationwide, 85% of IRC refugees are employed within the first 6 months of arrival. Here in Missoula, we've already seen that ratio significantly shorter. It's about 1.5 months before the first adult is employed. There is, from my understanding, a shortage of low-wage workers, and we are able to provide assistance in placing refugees with employers who are looking for good, quality, hardworking individuals.
Okay, go ahead, Mary. John has a question, too. So.
Yeah, and I just wanted to reiterate the worker shortage. This is something that we're hearing from Missoula Job Services. This is something that we're hearing from many small businesses that have approached us looking for people to be employed with them. Some of these small businesses have had job openings for 2+ years that they haven't found the employees to fill. So refugees do work at very high rates, and we have not had a problem in Missoula finding employment.
I wanted to, you mentioned at the beginning of the last response that we reopened the IRC. Of course, we had an IRC back when the Hmong were coming to Missoula, and refugees, the world population of refugees has only climbed since then. Why did the IRC shut down in Missoula for so long? And what was the impetus to come back? Was it just Mary's invitation?
But the impetus to come back was the outreach from Missoula, starting with Soft Landing, and then from community organizations, partners, government, all inviting us to come and to investigate if this is a good location to reopen resettlement. The IRC did do resettlement back in the 70s and 80s here in Missoula. When the numbers of Hmong and Belarusian decreased, the program grew smaller, and we handed it over to a local partner to do programming, and eventually just kind of stepped away from the process here in Missoula. So, yes, there is a history of refugee resettlement with the involvement of IRC Missoula, and we're very happy to be back here in the community.
Go ahead, Bob.
There's a theme that I've heard from several callers, and legitimately, if you look at the global economy right now, we have slowed. So when that happens, you go back historically, it's one of the juxtapositions that we do tend to look inward, and we do feel like, who's taking this job away? I think what happens, and you look at Europe, the EU have taken a lot of people. There's no question it's been an economic burden at a time, in many cases, they can't afford it. Brexit, rise of right-wing parties in Europe, what we see happening here. So these are things we do need to pay attention to. The longer term is, to your point, many of the jobs that these people fill are jobs that are not being filled. And in fact, if you look at Europe, many of the jobs being filled there are not wanting to be done by the European citizens and by the people that are coming in. It's the process that seems to be disturbing to people, as well as the fact that they look at this as a threat. They're not the same culture. They're not the same background.
Well, to further that point, so far the most commented on Facebook post on today's show is this post from Greg. I'll read it to you. It's a little bit of a hit, so get ready. Get your boxing gloves on. Greg says, we have more than enough people living under the Reserve Street Bridge that we can help. Many more living in cars in the Walmart parking lot or sleeping on their friends' couches. I would rather help these people first before we move to refugees who don't speak English and don't have any skills that will help them in America. But here's the part where it gets a little personal. But I think it's important for people to kind of understand why you guys are involved in this. He says, I feel it's more about grant money than it is about helping people. Carr, for instance, is from New York and has made a career of this kind of, quote, helping people, end quote. Again, I feel it's all about the money.
Okay. So, Mary, grab that. You were ready. You had your, go ahead. What's up?
Yeah, there are two questions there. Well, I do want to say that helping refugees and helping our homeless and our vets, it's not a mutually exclusive thing. You know, a rising tide lifts all ships. And if we're part of a community that places interest on helping those in need, we're only bringing more attention to other groups in need. And I would say, you know, anyone that wants to get out there and help the homeless and help vets, I encourage that. Both of those groups are affected populations that need support. One of the really cool things that we're hoping to build into our program is a service program to help guiding refugees, to work with other groups such as the food bank, veterans groups, Parks and Rec, to participate in volunteer service.
Is there a way to weave those organizations together?
Oh, there's absolutely. It's already happening.
All right. Okay.
So
go ahead. Real quick, we're going to take a break, so go ahead.
And further to that, you know, as we bring in resources to support the refugees, it's a community building program. So those resources also come in to help those already in Missoula in need.
So is it all about the money?
Oh, no. And I want to know why it's a bad thing for me to make a career out of my life doing something good for other people.
Or being from New York, more to the point.
Or being from New York.
And I also want to say to all of Missoula, Soft Landing Missoula's work to date, although we are trying to eventually get to the point of hiring staff, it's all been volunteer.
Okay.
I have a little bit of a personal connection. My sister doesn't work with IRC, but she works with another group that works with refugees. I actually believe they were also resettling Congolese refugees in Chicago. The group is called World Relief. And I can guarantee you she was not rolling in the money when she was doing this work. It was very much a service for her. But I don't know if that's the same for you, but I assume it is.
And with that, we're up against a break. We're actually a minute late. So Catherine, Mary, John, and Jeanette is back, I believe. We're going to come right back with more in a moment. All right, we're rolling right along on Talkback. 721-1290 is our number. All four lines humming, which means our rock stars are here with us, Mary Poole and Molly Shortcar from Soft Landing, Missoula. All right, let's continue on and take some more phone calls. Catherine, you're on Talkback. Go ahead.
Yeah, okay. First, I wanted to just say a little something about the monks. They had a couple of different connections when they came here. One was a very strong leader, the general, who lived here already, and the other was a very strong military person who was the one that got them here. And even though they had no written language or were an agrarian culture, the city started the farmers markets back in the 70s, were specifically to provide a market for Hmong products so that they could build their own businesses. The questions that I have. One is the housing is very tight here and very expensive.
Boy, is it?
How are you going to deal with that? Number two, welfare, since they're going to be on federal subsidies or federal welfare for a while, $1,800 is the total asset amount that's allowed under welfare, which causes a problem for a lot of people, but that, of course, is another thing altogether. Educational level of the refugees coming here, so the job skills available that they have, how are they going to fit with the job opportunities here? Where else are refugees going to come from? How many communities and countries besides Syria and
All right,
Iraq?
we're gonna hold off before you ask all the questions possible and try to get these ones answered. Okay, Catherine?
Okay, I do have one more.
Real quick.
Okay, and how many do you have in mind as for total resettlement here in Missoula? Do you have a number in mind?
Thanks for the call. Okay,
Thank
so
you.
Okay, so you want to start backwards, and how many are you planning to bring?
Right. So every year we put in a proposal to the State Department suggesting how many refugees we feel would be appropriate for resettlement in Missoula. And that is done in consultation with local officials, partner agencies, nonprofits, community members. So it's not something we do just picking a number and throwing it out there. In the proposal we have for this year, which was published in the Missoulian, it says up to 150 refugees in the fiscal year. Now, that up to means it could be less. We're projecting between 125 and 150.
No, you're talking 150 families or individuals?
Individuals.
Okay.
I don't have enough staff to do 150 families.
Okay, just checking. All right.
All right. So 150 individuals up to, and we're looking at refugees coming from various locations, potentially Eritrean refugees. We might have a few Burmese refugees who come through. There are some Burmese already living in the community. The Congolese refugees will continue to come. That is a priority group. We will have Syrian refugees as well as Iraqi refugees. And like the Hmong, many of the Iraqi refugees that we will be resettling also are providing support to U.S. interests, which led them to become refugees. Now, as far as housing, there are a lot of things that we look at to determine an appropriate housing situation for a family. The first thing we look at is size. If a family of 6 comes, then we need a 3-bedroom apartment. We're constantly giving feedback to our community partners about what we're looking for and how we want to, what we need to rent for the families that are coming in. Refugees do not get to jump to the front of the line on income or low-income housing assistance, so they will go into general, normal apartments.
They're in the queue, basically, right?
They don't go in the queue at all.
Oh, they don't? Okay.
They're eligible to apply for low-income housing, but they would go into the back of the line. We don't do the application process for
That's
them.
what I meant. Yeah, they get in line like everybody else.
Just
Okay.
like everybody else.
All right.
So, the housing will be a challenge. It's a challenge for everybody of low-income status around the United States. And it's not a new challenge, but part of our goal is to help develop systems and structures and to help the community as they work towards resolving the housing challenges in Missoula. Refugees are expected to work, and they're expected to be self-sufficient and to pay their own rent. They're not on welfare for long periods of time. Again, 85% of refugees in the IRC network are working within 6 months after they arrive. And as you begin working, those welfare assistance or public assistance come off, and you no longer are receiving them.
Okay, go ahead, Mary, real quick, and then we'll take a break.
Yeah, in fact, if you look at public assistance, of course, it's when refugees first get here, they are using public assistance. Within 10 years, the number of refugees using public assistance almost equalizes the number of American-born citizens using public assistance. So it really is, front-loaded in terms of those costs, but they are getting off welfare quite rapidly.
Okay.
And then they start, as they're working, as they're increasing the tax base, as they buy houses and are paying property taxes, they are paying back into the system. And again, between 13 to 22 years, they've paid back everything they've received.
Okay, we're going to come right back, and that means we have Mary, John, and Jeanette, and a line open for the next 18 minutes or so. We're going to come right back with more from the folks from Soft Landing right after this. Okay, we're back on Talkback. 721-1290 is the number. Bob, you have a quick question. Go ahead.
Yes. Could you please describe for the audience, in bringing refugees into this country, we do a lot right here. I look at Europe and I say, hey, there's some issues that you guys have. So are we developing a prototype that in effect Europeans are looking at? And if so, can you give us a little bit of background?
Yeah, definitely. With the establishment of the 1980 Refugee Act, a lot of the systems we have in place were developed. The Office of Refugee Resettlement, the Population and Refugee Migration through the State Department. And we do a lot of things right, starting with how we screen refugees and determine who's eligible to come here. And when they get here, our rapid integration and our rapid self-sufficiency model. And this has allowed refugees to become part of our community, to be giving back to our community, to help in socio and economic challenged areas, to help redevelop those communities. And there is definitely a very strong interest throughout the European Union to look at different ways of approaching refugee assistance challenges. There's very few countries in the world who do direct refugee resettlement like we do, that select refugees overseas, put them through a process of screening, and bring them to defined communities in advance.
So what is it about our culture that allows people to integrate? I don't want to say easy, but it appears to be more easily than particularly many of the European countries.
I think we just have a tremendously strong tradition in the United States of recognizing, those in need, how we can help them, and then recognizing it's not just what we do for them, but what they can do and give back to us. And that is really, I think, the foundation of what our country is.
Okay, let's move on. Let's get Mary on the line. Mary, thank you for your patience. You've been waiting the longest. Go ahead.
Good morning. I wanted to point out there are, I believe, 37 states who have opted out of this federal program. There has to be reasons why they didn't just opt out for no reason. Someone did bring up the point we recently passed millions of dollar bond issues for our schools. We bought our water company for millions. There's a new library initiative. These monies, a lot of them are generated from property tax owners, and only 50% are homeowners in Missoula. The rest are rentals. They have no skin in the game, to speak. Also, many of you are familiar with the sanctuary cities for refugees in the United States. I'm wondering why these refugees could not be put up in sanctuary cities in the Middle East, where their language is familiar and the landscape as well.
All right, Mary.
3, I would suggest talk back, invite an opposition to guest to discuss this. And 4th, Sweden, who has a multitude of Muslim, I would call it an invasion, are losing their sovereignty because of it. And you can check that fact out. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mary. Okay, ladies, so you want to address any of that? Go ahead.
Let's start with this statement that 37 states have opted out of the resettlement program. This is not an accurate reflection. There have been less than a handful of states that have opted out of the refugee resettlement program. And it's not the receiving of the refugees. They do not have the authority. This is a federal government program.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
What they've opted out of is being the agency that conducts the financial assistance that goes to refugees. And so, in essence, those refugees are still going to come, but the state government is no longer involved in administering the support programs that go to those refugees.
So all the monies that they receive will come from the federal government.
Yes, so those federal dollars no longer go to the state; they go to the agencies directly.
Go ahead, John.
I'm curious. You've worked with IRC in New York as well as in Montana, and I just was kind of curious. We hear headlines, we see stories, and there's obviously a lot of reaction to the refugee resettlement in Missoula. Is that something that you expected, or is that surprising to you? And how does it compare to your experience in New York?
So I have. I didn't work for IRC in New York. I worked for an organization called Journey's End, and we contracted with Church World Service, one of the 9 agencies, and Episcopal Migration Ministries to resettle refugees. I left that position in 2014, and at that time, it was not a big debate issue. This is a program that had admitted over 3 million people when I left. And I went to go work on the opposite side, the processing side in Nairobi, Kenya, for sub-Saharan Africa. And it wasn't until very recently that this became such a large discussion point with a lot of conflicting information that's out there. And so when I came back here to Montana, I expected, when I came back to the U.S. and moved to Montana, I expected that it would be a conversation and a talking point, and we are happy to engage in that conversation. What I didn't expect is that for some people, it's gone beyond a conversation and has become something much more unpleasant and ugly in nature.
Well, it's become a campaign issue, for one thing, and especially people who are worried, as the lady Mary just mentioned, they're worried about Muslims coming to America and then trying to force their religion and judicial system, Sharia law, on America. So that is a fear that many people have.
Right, but I have to say something that I feel very deeply, and I feel is important to say, that I have done a lot of work with people on both sides of this issue. And the idea that people that disagree with refugee resettlement are hateful or bigots or racist is not accurate. I absolutely acknowledge there is a huge diversity of people with questions and people in opposition to refugee resettlement. And I think that we do need to get past this idea that, they're evil people or people that are racist or the multitudes of things. And I know, and Soft Landing Missoula is very interested in understanding that diversity and having these conversations. And I think that we've shown that in the work that we've done. But I just want to reiterate that, yes, there are people out there that we are receiving, threatening messages from. There are people out there that are, because I see the letters that I get in the mail, there are people out there that are racially motivated and motivated by racism. But the large diversity that occurs within people that have questions needs to be acknowledged.
Okay, and with that, we're up against our last 1 minute break. It's amazing how quickly this goes. And we still have all four lines humming, so we'll get as many calls in as we can when we come back. It's amazing how time slips away. 721-1290, so many phone calls, and let's get as many in as we can. John, good morning. If you could make your question or comment short, we'd appreciate it. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, I live about 40 miles north of Missoula. Last year I was talking to a gentleman that had just moved here from Texas with his family, and they had 4 children, and they were from a town in Texas not much bigger than Missoula, and 7 or 8 years ago they started this refugee program. I think he said the first year they brought in 40 families from Africa, and the next year way more, mostly from Somalia, and it just kept increasing, and it got to the point where the school system was just, overcrowded with all these students. None of them could speak English when they came over here, and the quality of his children's education was getting so poor that first they thought about homeschooling, but they couldn't because of their jobs. They tried to get in private and Christian schools, but they had a waiting list a mile long, and finally they had to make the tough decision because the education system, because all of these refugees in the school system has gotten so poor, plus the crime rate had went up, they decided to leave their good jobs, their nice house, and all their relatives and move up here to get away from the situation. So, all
right, John, let's let them address that, okay?
Yeah.
Thanks for the call. So quickly, ladies, go ahead.
As refugees arrive in Missoula, it's not as if we don't have English language learners already in Missoula public schools. So the programs are already existing. Our goal is to integrate refugees at a reasonable rate that would allow the community to accommodate and to help integrate the refugees. I don't know the specifics of the situation in Texas, if there's any other mediating factors. I do know that, on average, refugees are less likely to commit crimes. They have a much lower rate of being involved in criminal activities than the average American. So I think we'd need to see what other factors are coming together in that community the gentleman came from.
Bob, go ahead.
Just very quickly, if we were to close our eyes, and I would say this is 1900 or 1920 or 1880, we would be having the same conversation. We had the Irish ambassador on just last week, and her comment was, think about the Irish, same situation in many respects, overwhelming the cities, New York. As she pointed out, they built Anaconda, they built Butte, along with other people. So I just ask us to look at the bigger picture here.
Okay, let's get Patty on. We got about 3 minutes. Patty, quickly.
Yeah. First of all, I'm of the understanding that the Congolese and refugees were in a refugee camp for 17 years.
Yeah, many of the kids grew up in refugee camps, yeah.
Right. That's the only country in Africa that trains them to be soldiers as little children. So if they were in these refugee camps and they were well fed, why couldn't we set their town up there? I mean, I don't understand. Our families worked very hard and paid a lot of taxes to build the infrastructure and the school systems in America for our children. Why don't you ask the Native Americans if they want any more guests coming into their country? And who do we sue if our daughters get raped? Thank you.
All right. Okay. So.
That was a lot of information. Yes, the refugees have been living in camps for extended periods of time, not in Congo. They fled from Congo, from people who may choose to engage in forced child labor and forcing children to become soldiers so that they could protect their children. They fled to various countries, and the life in the refugee camp is not easy. It is a very difficult refugee life. 1,200 calories a day, inability to educate your children, inability to work within many of the countries. And so host countries that are receiving large refugee populations also have to deal with the realities of their own social and economic conditions. So resettling refugees in the host country, which we call integration, is a possibility, and it does happen. But it cannot happen on the scale that we have as far as the world refugee crisis.
Okay, real quick, Mary. So go ahead.
And again, we're only looking at 1% of registered refugees that even begin to qualify for third country settlement. So in large part, 99% of refugees are served, within local constraints or back home.
Okay, I'll tell you what, I want to get one more call, and we have a minute. Andy, can you make your point in 30 seconds?
Yes, good morning. The Ravalli County Commissioners and the Ravalli County Board of Realtors had a hate and fear fest down here in Hamilton last spring, and I was wondering if our guests have received backlash from those type of people.
Okay, thanks for the call. We're almost completely out of time, so go ahead.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to say the beauty of Montana is incredible, and this is Mary, I have met with countless individuals with questions and concerns, and I tell you the overwhelming theme with those people is I've got questions, I've got some concerns, but you know what? In reality, I'll be the first person to shake a hand when they get here.
Okay, real quick. How do we get in touch with your organization if we want to make comments or help out or have questions?
Yeah, Soft Landing has a website, www.softlandingmissoula.org. We're also hosting a lecture next Tuesday, November 1st, from 6 to 8 at the Uri Lecture Hall. For those of you who want more information about resettlement, it is going to focus on resettlement. We're going to have a good hour at the end for questions. It's about open dialogue.
Okay, and go ahead, real quick.
And also you can find out more from
We're out of time. Thanks. Bye.
Oh, sorry.